If you can tick off the following 3 points, then you can turn this video off right away. 1, do you know you're in the market for an ultralight premium laptop? 2, do you have an aversion to Mac OS and a significant preference for Windows 10? And 3, is money no object? If you can't answer all those questions easily, then you're going to want to watch on. This is filling you in, and today we're going to be talking about the Dell XPS 13. Let's go. Long heralded as the go-to model if you want to get MacBook feeling levels of quality in the Windows device, the XPS 13 simply exudes premiumness, if that's even a word. It's aluminium head to toe. The aluminium effect leaves it feeling extremely light as well, weighing in at just about 1.3 kilos, for which there aren't really many other models, maybe outside of the LG Gram in the market, that are going to give you the same levels of performance and lightness. In terms of ports, the situation is okay. We do have 2 USB-C ports on either side of the model. Both support charging. The advantage of that simply being where, depending on where your plug socket is based, it doesn't mean you have to drape cables around the back to an awkward position, knocking drinks over, spilling things on your £1,000 laptop and all that. We also have a micro SD card reader. So I guess if you'd like to take a lot of photos on your phone and then transfer it across to your device, that's okay. But I think most creative professionals would prefer to see a full-size SD card slot. For the most part, people are going to need an adapter. Sad face time, there are no USB-A ports. So like it or lump it, you're going to have to adopt that dongle life. That being said though, Dell have included a USB-A to Type-C adapter in the box, which is great. But if you want to make the most of other inputs, say mice, keyboard, multiple monitors, Ethernet cable, you're going to need to invest in a dedicated, much more powerful dongle, particularly if you want to maximize the Thunderbolt 4 capabilities that come with these USB-C ports. In terms of Thunderbolt 4, it's basically the same as Thunderbolt 3, but establishes some better minimum specifications. So if you are quite literally dripping in cash, you can now tie and loop in both of your 4K monitors into this to use it as more of a workstation device. But for mere mortals like you and I, you're not going to see a tangible difference between Thunderbolt 3 and Thunderbolt 4, but it's nice to have nonetheless. Let's talk about the insides of the device. So in terms of the initial surfacing, you get this carbon fiber deck, which again feels really plush to touch. One minor criticism is the corners of the device do end up feeling a little bit sharp, which I don't tend to find I notice too much when working at a table, but when lounging on the couch in the evening where you're lying in a bit more of a horizontal position, I do find it starts scraping into my wrists over a period of time, so that is a point you need to keep in mind. In terms of the keyboard, it's possibly the most satisfying laptop keyboard I've ever used. The keys are shallow, yet you're left feeling like you're getting a lot of travel. It's not overly noisy. I found it really easy to get up to speed quickly. You won't have any complaints about this keyboard. Say you won't. At the end of the day, it does come down to personal preference, but I think the vast majority of consumers are going to love what they get if they buy this Dell XPS 13. As for the trackpad, well, given the size of the device, I guess I can't really complain with the size of the trackpad. I do feel like it was slightly larger, like Dell perhaps could have found a few millimeters here or there at the top and bottom end of the device to squeeze in something a little bit larger. But at the same time, it's perfectly manageable. It is a Windows precision trackpad as well, so you get the full array of Windows gestures when interfacing with your keyboard. Now let's talk about the price of this thing. This model I've got right here is £1,400, so this is not a cheap laptop at all. So don't go fooling yourself when you come in thinking about getting a Dell XPS 13. That being said, across the entire range, you're left with a laptop screen with peak brightness of 500 nits, which is kind of retina melting, so that's really good. Within the Dell XPS 13 range, they do offer both full HD panels and 4K panels, with the 4K panels also having touch-sensitive screen options. If that's the kind of thing you're into, I should note that on the side there is a 2-in-1 version of the Dell XPS 13, which is far more oriented around true touch engagement, such as the utilization of a pen for artworking and the like. That's the only place you're going to find a 32GB of RAM option for the device. So if you're absolutely set on having a version of the Dell XPS 13 and you need, for whatever reason, 32GB of RAM, you're going to need to go with the 2-in-1. Now, on a personal level, I feel like a 4K display on a 13-inch laptop is overkill and isn't worth the trade-off in battery price. But at the same time, having transitioned from using a Surface Book 2 on a day-to-day basis, which has a higher than regular HD screen, to this regular HD version of the Dell XPS 13, I am left feeling like I'm missing a few pixels. I feel it's a real shame that Dell and other manufacturers aren't introducing more Quad HD 1440p levels of resolution, which I feel is increasingly going to be the sweet spot both for full-blown desktop monitors and for almost any size of laptop as well. Now let's talk aspect ratio, which is to say the number of horizontal pixels versus vertical pixels. And in this case, we have what's otherwise referred to as a 16:10 aspect ratio, which means you're getting the same typical width you would get on a 13-inch monitor, but you're getting increased height. Now that may not seem a lot going from 16:9 to 16:10, but I promise you, when you actually start using a 16:10 device, you'll really struggle to go back, both in terms of hardcore productivity work, be it video production or software development, doing coding, just a standard web browsing or writing in a Word document. That added space, and I'm avoiding the YouTube term real estate, but that added space really does make a difference to the way you interact with the laptop. I should note though, for the sake of all consumers watching this, the one minor downside, and you'll get over this quickly, I promise, is that when watching in 16:10, you will end up with the 2 black bars across the top of the screen. But as I said, I promise you can easily live with that. Now let's get into the techie stuff. The Dell XPS 13 offers a range of Intel processors, from an i5 up to various i7s. This version is the beautifully named, I say sarcastically, 1185G7, which comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now on the topic of RAM, and I'm going to say this in every laptop I ever review, for the love of all that's holy, seriously consider paying that little bit extra to get the 16 gigs. Increasingly, just for standard day-to-day activity I'm doing on my laptop, not even heavy productivity work, I find my memory utilization around the 6.5, 7 gigabytes of RAM mark. And as more 16 gigabyte devices enter into the market, software developers for sure are going to start configuring their applications to use more RAM. So don't get left behind by spending the better part of $1,000 on a laptop, which in 2 years' time might leave you feeling particularly slow. Now let's have a deeper dive at exactly how this CPU is benchmarked against a few other devices. For the purposes of this scenario, I'm going to use a real-world test, so many of you will be looking to upgrade from a laptop you already have. So I'm going to be using my 3-year-old Surface Book 2 to illustrate how this Dell XPS 13 performs in comparison to it. And for those of you thinking that maybe, wrongly, that the Dell XPS 13 might replace a full desktop workstation, I've also included some statistics from my home PC, which is a Ryzen 7 3000 series CPU. So we're going to start with Cinebench R23. And as you can see, the 11th gen Intel chip has a better part of a 55% improvement over the 8th generation Intel Surface Book 2 CPU in multi-threaded workloads. And I feel like we need to give some serious credit to Intel here for their single core performance in the Dell XPS 13, beating out the single core performance on the Ryzen 7 37000X. Now, it didn't manage to do that, obviously, with the multi-core, which is hardly unsurprising because this thing thermal throttles like a beast. And just to prove it wasn't a fluke, we ran CPU tests in Geekbench as well and found that once more, the Dell XPS 13 had a significant performance improvement in its processing power versus the 8th gen chip in the Surface Book 2. And once again, we found that the 11th generation Intel processor in single core workloads still outperformed the dedicated AMD Ryzen desktop CPU. On the video editing front, this thing isn't going to replace a dedicated workstation or a much more powerful laptop. That being said, we did see the better part of a 27% improvement over the 8th generation Intel chip in the Surface Book 2, but still it took the better part of 19 minutes to render a 6.5 minute 4K video, which when compared with a dedicated desktop workstation like the Ryzen 3700X that I've got, which took only 4.5 minutes, you're definitely going to want to be investing in a much more powerful machine if video editing is your day-to-day use case for a laptop. Now, there are no options for dedicated graphics cards inside the Dell XPS 13, but not all is lost, because with 11th gen Intel comes their Iris Xe chipset graphics, which are a major step change in performance over the prior generation's chipset graphics with Intel CPUs. Once again, I've included the Surface Book 2, which actually has a dedicated discrete graphics card in the form of an NVIDIA GeForce 1050, but I have excluded the PC this time because, frankly, it's not fair. And the results here do really go to show just how much of a leap forward Intel has made in terms of their integrated graphics. What we can see in Geekbench across both Vulkan and OpenCL tests is that the integrated graphics chip in the Dell XPS 13 outperforms that of the dedicated graphics card in the Surface Book 2, which is to say only 3 years old, by the better part of 10%. And it wasn't a fluke either. We ran similar tests in Luxmark, which does a wider array of graphics tests, and whilst it was only a marginal improvement in around the region of 1 to 2% on average across all 3 tests, it does really hammer home the fact of just how far Intel's integrated graphics have come versus dedicated graphics cards of only a few years ago. As far as gaming goes on the XPS 13, you definitely won't be in the territory of being able to play modern AAA titles like Cyberpunk or The Witcher, but it'll happily play older titles and even more modern esports games like CSGO and Overwatch. I found that on the lower end of the settings I could get this thing to operate in and around the sort of maximum 60 FPS range. Now that we've touched on performance, let's talk temperatures. So when this thing is under load, you're going to notice the keyboard getting warm. Fortunately, I wouldn't say it's uncomfortably so. The same can't be said of the underside of this thing, where you really do feel the temperature coming through that aluminium chassis. Temperatures go hand in hand with fan noise, and I'm pleased to say actually, it's quite pleasant in the Dell XPS 13. Under load, you do hear it whir up a little bit, but it's nothing like the turbines I'm used to experiencing in the Surface Book 2, to the point where I think Dell could actually stand to put either larger fans in this device or tune them so they rev a little bit higher. Now, unlike some laptop manufacturers who were erroneously removing webcams, the Dell XPS 13 manages to keep theirs in what is otherwise an unbelievably thin bezel. Let's take a look at how that is.
And here's an example of the 720p camera that comes with the Dell XPS 13. As you can see, it's pretty grainy, the sound is a bit tinny, it doesn't really pick up the lighting particularly very well, and that is exacerbated by the conditions of the room I'm in, where I've got the window on this side, so you really get that kind of two-face effect down the middle of my face. But at the same time, it's kind of par the course for webcams in laptops and ultrabooks.
And for comparison's sake, here's me working on my dedicated webcam that I've attached to my desktop PC. This is a 1080p webcam from Logitech, and as you can see, the quality is significantly better than we get on the Dell XPS 13 with its 720p webcam. And that's not to necessarily heavily criticize Dell. All laptop manufacturers do the same, but in the modern world we're in now, and the world will probably continue to be in even after the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to see a lot more people working from home. It's high time laptop manufacturers started including higher quality webcams by default. And as far as speakers go on this thing, I mean, they're pretty good for a laptop of its size. Most laptops typically don't have great speakers, but you won't have any major complaints when listening to music or video through the Dell XPS 13. Now, as we said at the start of the video, if you're in the market for a premium laptop, Windows 10, and money isn't really an object, you're not going to find much else better in the market. Possibly the HP Spectre X360, but then that is ultimately a different form factor, being not the atypical clamshell, rather the reversible 2-in-1. If you happen to be on the fence between Windows 10 and MacBook, you really do need to consider the performance that's now offered by the current range of MacBooks with their Apple Silicon. The performance truly is incredible, and if you can overlook the fact that actually the premium quality and the build isn't quite that of the Dell XPS 13, that might still actually be the laptop for you. Both Intel and AMD, in whichever manufacturer's laptops they have their chips, really need to start asking and providing answers to exactly how they're going to meet the competition challenge now presented by Apple Silicon. And that's it for today, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe so you see some of the upcoming content, where I hope to be taking a look at the Apple Silicon MacBooks, the LG Gram, and the HP Spectre X360, all coming up here on Filling You In. Bye for now.